There is a calling that happens when one gazes out at the ocean. One is immediately filled with a sense of awe and mystery. The ocean is naturally magnetic and draws the awareness of all who gaze at her. You cannot help but be calmed by the sight of an infinite horizon line. Behind the seemingly real world lies a type of ocean too. This ocean's influence is great, yet it remains hidden to most except those with ears to hear and eyes to see. Within this ocean lies nothing and everything simultaneously. It is a place where thoughts cannot penetrate, yet where all thoughts originate. It is the first and the last, the Alpha and Omega. It is the speech that cannot be grasped. This vast ocean within us is accessible through the Spirit, that part of ourselves that acts as a shuttle between worlds, bringing the inspirations of this infinite ocean to our conscious awareness. It's our connection to the one infinite. Spirit is immovable, and it is our guiding light out of the darkness of ignorance. Spirit enables one to transcend the rigidity of matter. Matter is locked into linear time, while spirit remains outside it. Thus, a great tug-of-war emerges within us. Do you follow the desperate urging of matter or the subtle calling of spirit? Those strong in spirit are able to transcend the limitations of matter and thus become liberated. The study of the spirit cycle is the study of this mysterious shuttle and the ways in which spirit operates in the physical. It is the study of our return to the one in the marriage of opposites, the lower and the higher mind. Let us begin our study of the archetypes of the spirit by looking first at primeval darkness, the matrix of the spirit. The matrix of the spirit is also called the devil in Tarot. In the Brotherhood of Light deck, the devil is depicted as the Egyptian deity Typhon, the spirit of the adversary. Typhon means insolence and pride and represents egotism and self-centeredness. This archetype suggests the lesson as to how it happens that beings can forfeit their freedom and become slaves of a monstrous entity which makes them degenerate by rendering them similar to it. Its theme is one of the generation of negative thought forms and of the power that they have over those who generate them. It is the arcanum of the creation of artificial beings and of the slavery into which the creator can fall, becoming a slave of his own creation. The ego is just such a thought form. Grafted onto us during development as an infant, the ego functions as a way to interact in a mostly material existence. Its purpose is as an interface, allowing you to function within this plane. Its domain is the material, and its concern is with physical survival. In a perfect world, the veil between worlds is not as tightly shut, and the higher takes command over the lower, and thus has command over the ego. However, in our world, we are lost in the lower, and our egos often have full command of us, and often keep us enslaved. We become lost in the roles we play, and the mask that we wear. For some, this mask is all there is. For others, the calling of spirit penetrates through and beckons them forward. The self-centered desires of the ego, when followed, often result in destruction and enslavement. You become what you focus on. Those that focus on the lower attract and become the lower. Those that focus on the higher attract and become the higher. The difference can sometimes be subtle. The lower feels desperate and urgent. The higher feels more subtle. One demands, the other suggests. This is how to tell the difference between the urgings of the lower and the subtle pull of the higher. The more we follow the lower, the more we become enslaved by it, the deeper the darkness becomes. Ross says the matrix of the spirit is what you may call the night of the soul or primeval darkness. This archetype can be seen as a difference between inspiration and counter-inspiration. Every moment is a choice, and the choice of what to be inspired by is critical to the development of the adept. To be inspired by that which is false demands the adept to immerse themselves in that which is false. Likewise, for adepts to be inspired by that which is true requires the adept to see through falsity. Just how it is easier to gain weight than to lose it, the starting position of everyone who comes through 3D reality at this time is darkness. It requires constant vigilance, work, and applied wisdom to see through falsity. Some, such as wanderers, have a better developed spirit that can help them see through it easier than others, but it requires work nonetheless to avoid the trappings of Typhon. Ross says, the adept then is working with the power of hidden things illuminated by that which can be false or true. To embrace falsity, to know it, to seek it, and to use it gives a power that is most great. While the darkness is deep in this matrix, the divine flash of lightning can break through and provide a glimpse and insight into a path out of the dark. Surrounding Typhon and his slaves are fallen pillars. In the Potentiator of the mind, Isis is shown between two great pillars, symbolizing the fact that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. The pillars represent the 2 out of 3 pillars of the Tree of Life. These are strength and wisdom, and the 3rd pillar being harmony, which is placed between them. 2 pillars are also represented archetypally as entrances to sacred places. They represent an important gateway or passage toward the unknown. The destruction of the pillars by Typhon reinforces the image of this archetype being darkness by cutting off this gateway to the spiritual. Without the guiding influence of spirit, chaos, destruction, and enslavement reign supreme, and those that attempt to serve the ego eventually become enslaved by it. The Potentiator of the spirit, also known as the Blasted Tower in Tarot, represents the danger and the blindness that accompanies rigid structure and hyper-specialization. It presents the law of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is an archetypal story told in many forms across many different cultures. The story tells the tale of the world existing as one people who attempt to bypass nature and replace the transcendent. But their attempt fails when God sends lightning to strike the tower, destroying their attempts. The people attempting to build the tower are then scattered across the earth and are unable to communicate with each other. The underlying theme is, only nature can overcome nature. The story illustrates that hyper-adaptiveness inevitably leads to destruction. Evolution cannot happen when one is complacent. Growth cannot happen if one cannot see that they are stuck. Insights cannot be gained when one's thinking is blocked by rigid specialization. Progress, whether individual or societal, is often thwarted due to hyper-adaptiveness and specialization. In other words, it's easy to get stuck in a box if you adapt yourself too rigidly. This archetype shows us that on the path of spiritual evolution, moving from the dark night to the light of the sun, one who is working from the rigid structure of ego will inevitably be met by the thunderbolts from above. These thunderbolts provide a means to remove the obstacles to further progress, however, at potentially great cost to the one who built the tower. The more rigid the structure, the harder the fall. The deeper the arrogance, the greater the rebuilding that's necessary. The potential afforded by the lightning is such that it not only destroys the towers of rigid structure built in arrogance by the lower mind, but also provides that brief light that illuminates the darkness, showing the entity what it is and what it is not. It has the potential to show the folly of the tower. Ross says, the original Potentiator was light in its sudden and fiery form, that is, the lightning itself. The destructive power of lightning can also illuminate, and the often tragic consequences of being struck by lightning also allow us to see clearly, if only briefly. This clarity invites one to seek further, beyond the rigid towers. The Potentiator of the spirit represents the fragile nature of the separate ego and the fructifying effects of spirit upon the material world. It represents our personal apocalypse. Apocalypse in Greek means an unveiling, and the Blasted Tower is an unveiling, but it often comes at a price. The catalyst of the spirit, sometimes called the star in Tarot, represents growth, while the potentiator of the spirit represents the end result of rigid structure and separation. The catalyst of the spirit represents the dynamic flowing nature of spirit. On the card is depicted a nude woman who represents that truth can only be perceived when stripped off of dogmatic opinions and preconceived ideas, which are clothed by the artificiality of civilization. The catalyst of the spirit can be seen as the representation of faith. Faith is the celestial and spiritual counterpart of the terrestrial and natural instinct of biological reproduction. Biological reproduction moves and directs physical evolution, and likewise, faith is what moves and directs spiritual evolution in the world. Insofar as it moves, it is an objective force, and insofar as it orients and directs, it is a subjective light. We are guided by this subjective light, and it is the main driver of all evolution. This subjective light can be summed up by this quote from the Gospel of Thomas: "The truth is one in many, so as to teach us the innumerable one of love." All have different interpretations of what this light is, thus the many and varied expressions of it. There is one truth, but that truth is filtered through our subjective experiences. Thus, there are many ways to approach it and access it. Faith is how we can shuttle between worlds. It's how we can access the inspirations and intuitions of spirit. The catalyst of the spirit provides the fertile land of the mind with the inspiration from the deep ocean of infinite potential. It waters the mind and provides for the growth of potentiated action. Likewise, the catalyst of spirit also returns to the ocean the unique gem of knowledge gained from the experience of the catalyst. Inspiration comes to us from the infinite potential. It is said that nothing is created but merely channeled. Those that are attuned with this current can access the intuition from spirit, which funnels through the deep mind the inspirations which makes its way up to the conscious mind. The catalyst of the spirit can be summed up in this saying: "I am activity, the effective cause, who set all in motion, and I am contemplation, the final cause, who draws towards himself all that which is in the movement. I am primordial action, and I am eternal, waiting for all to arrive where I am." Anything that assaults the senses is considered catalyst according to Ra, and catalyst being processed by the body is catalyst for the body, and likewise for the mind and for the spirit. The catalyst of the mind relates to how the unconscious and conscious mind processes a catalyst. An experience is offered through the unconscious resonance of a particular vibration. The successful processing of this catalyst results in the sharpening of a polarity, either positive or negative. The catalyst of the body depicts the process of how a catalyst is attracted, relating to the etheric body's influence on probability. The catalyst of the spirit relates to the spirit's role as a shuttle, bringing inspiration from the divine to the mind and returning wisdom gained from the mind back to the divine. The book, A Handbook for a New Paradigm, explains further: the expansive flow of the universal energies that underlie the manifestation of potentiality into expression requires that knowledge be experienced into wisdom. The underlying purpose of all existence is for intelligence to gain wisdom. Wisdom is gained when one can properly process catalysts. In the depiction of this archetype in the tarot card, above the woman is an 8-rayed star. The 8-rayed star is very similar to the 8-petaled lotus. As the lotus flower exists in 3 worlds, earth, water, and air, so too does man exist in 3 worlds: material, intellectual, and spiritual. The lotus has its roots in the mud, as man has its beginnings in base desire and action. To grow, the lotus must follow the light of the sun through the water, transforming into a beautiful flower that floats peacefully atop the muck. Like the lotus, we must pass through the murky water of illusion, following what little sunlight passes through in order to emerge on the other side, transformed. The moon does not generate its own light. but receives its light from the sun. Thus the moon can deceive as well as enlighten. And as the moon reflects the light of the sun, so too does human intelligence reflect the creative light of the divine, and the latter is eclipsed when the lower intellect prevails. The lower intellect is concerned with materiality. It dwells with facts and figures and acts more like a computer, processing inputs and calculating outputs. Given false inputs, the lower intellect will not realize that its outputs are also false until it hits an impasse and a forced awakening causes it to reassess. The lower intellect is completely blind and is detached from seeing absolute reality. Ra says, the moonlight then offers either a true picture seen in shadow or a chimera and falsity. The power of falsity is deep, as is the power to discern truth from shadow. The shadow of hidden things is an infinite depth in which is stored the power of the one infinite creator. The adept, then, is working with the power of hidden things illuminated by that which can be false or true. To embrace falsity, to know it, to seek it, and to use it gives a power that is most great. Those who experience an awakening, who meet the potentiator of the spirit, often find themselves immersed in what they believe is the truth, but is merely a simulacrum of truth. You see this sometimes manifested in those who grew up in strict religious households. Often there is an awakening whereby the rigid structure of the tower upon which they've built their beliefs comes crashing down. A rejection then occurs, whereby instead of transcending the tower, the individual turns towards lower forms of expression. In the macrocosm, the scenario plays out as evidenced by the rise in relativistic philosophy, the rejection of the spirit and faith, the worship of the intellect, and ridiculous pseudo-spiritual beliefs. The tower of rigid religious and superstitious beliefs has created the opposite in our society, a tower of rigid, rational intellect. What's needed to evolve is to transcend the falsehood of the pure, rational intellect. This is represented by the concept of intuition. The intellect is the map, and your intuition is the compass. It inspires, guides, and gives insight into what is north. Those with just a map and no compass can easily get lost. They can easily confuse the map for the territory. Only by using intuition can one transcend the bounds of the intellect into true insight. All this is not to say the lower intellect has no place. Rather, the intellect must be put in service to the higher. The higher should guide the lower. While the lower can discern the territory somewhat, the higher has the full picture and can guide the lower toward the truth. In the tarot cards, we see two dogs in front of the pyramids. These represent the ability to sense unseen things. According to the famed occultist Manly P. Hall, dogs were revered in ancient Egypt for their ability to follow and track unseen persons for miles, which symbolizes the transcendental power by which the philosopher follows the thread of truth through the labyrinth of earthly error. The scorpion below can be seen as representing wisdom as well as deceit. It is considered a symbol of both wisdom and self-destruction, for the fire which the scorpion controls is capable of illuminating as well as consuming. Scorpions were revered by the ancient Egyptians, as well as the Babylonians and Assyrians, as guardians of the gateway of the sun. 7 scorpions were said to have accompanied Isis when she searched for the remains of Osiris scattered by Typhon, an allegory for her true nature being suppressed by the matrix and those that worship it, as well as the healing power of the spirit. This world is seemingly immersed in falsity. Even those who are on the path of adepthood get easily taken in by the moonlight. Ra says, by far the majority of adepts remain groping in the moonlight, and as we have said, this light can deceive as well as uncover hidden mystery. The way out of the moonlight and falsity is to transcend the intellect by the use of intuition and faith. Anytime you are relying on your intellect alone, you are not seeing the full picture. There are a variety of ways this can manifest. Ra says, the power of which you speak is a spiritual power. The powers of the mind, as such, do not encompass such works of these. You may, with some fruitfulness, consider the possibilities of moonlight. You are aware that we have described the matrix of the spirit as a night. The moonlight then offers either a true picture seen in shadow or a chimera in falsity. There is hidden truth contained within all. To grasp the green language is to understand the true picture seen behind the shadow. For example, consider a situation where an emotional reaction to some occurrence continues to happen for someone in their life. Let's say the reaction is a result of their ego being bruised for whatever reason. The ego, of course, is purely the matrix of the spirit. By itself, it is completely detached from the spirit and completely immersed in matter. The spirit locked completely within ego is locked in darkness. Now there are a variety of possible reasons why this individual's ego was bruised. Perhaps there was not enough love given to them as a child, and they therefore developed a big ego to give themselves the love that they always sought. True love of self, of course, comes from the spirit. However, being immersed in the matrix of the spirit, they cannot consciously sense this love. And whenever their ego is bruised, they react unconsciously by attacking the one who has seemingly caused this reaction within themselves. But the emotional reaction offers the possibility of clarity for them. It offers them the ability to awaken and uncover the hidden trauma that causes them to react this way, to see the truth hidden behind the shadow. Alternatively, it offers them the opportunity to deepen the darkness and to strengthen the personality, to deepen the separation. As Ra says, the experience of the spirit, that which you have called the moon, is then by far the more manifest of influences upon the polarity of the adept. Even the most unhappy of experiences, shall we say, which seem to occur in the catalyst of the adept, seen from the viewpoint of the spirit, may, with the discrimination possible in shadow, be worked with into a light equaling the light of brightest noon descends upon the adept, and positive or service to others illumination has occurred. The service to self-adept will satisfy itself with the shadows, and, grasping the light of day, will toss back the head in grim laughter, preferring the darkness. So the experience of the spirit is such that, for the most part in 3D reality, we dwell in an unconscious state. Those that are awake are still veiled to a great extent, and while they are seeing more of the landscape illuminated by the moon, they still get tricked by the shadows if they are not discerning enough. In the ancient world, the sun was seen as reflecting the light of the true spiritual sun, the true source of light. The physical world was affected by unseen forces in the spiritual realm. Thus, the sun that we see in the sky reflected a small portion of the light of the divine, and the surrounding planets received the light and were affected by it. What was above was the cause for what was below. Matter receives its power from the realm of spirit, and spirit enlivens matter. Likewise in us, our lower intellect receives its power from the higher. In the Significator of the spirit, we see the union of intelligence with spontaneous wisdom, the marriage of the lower and the higher. Intelligence alone is blind. Without the guidance of intuition and gnosis, it is prone to grasping at shadows, operating like the Ouroboros, eating its own tail. While the moon represents the landscape dominated by the intellect, the sun represents the merging of the intellect with gnosis, or knowledge. In the book Greater Community Spirituality, Marshall V. N. Summers and the Allies of Humanity speak of knowledge, this incorruptible essence within us that guides and protects. In the Cassiopean channelings, the Cassiopeans repeatedly state that knowledge protects. Knowledge is a direct knowing of truth. It is gnosis. It is being in tune with the Logos, with your higher self. It is having a direct communion with Source. How does knowledge protect? Knowledge protects by allowing one to live in accordance with divine principles, beyond the reach of the corrupted demiurge. It allows for an individual's reality boundary to remain at a frequency incompatible with lower frequencies. In other words, it protects by synchronistically aligning you with a more positive reality. Knowledge becomes increasingly more accessible by the adept who successfully navigates the dark landscape illuminated by the moon, one who is not guided in misleading directions, and one who can see the truth behind the illusions being presented, one who is increasingly able to understand the language of the birds. Ross says this about the Significator of the Spirit. The Significator of the Spirit is that living entity which either radiates or absorbs the love and the light of the one infinite Creator, radiates it to others, or absorbs it for the self. The sun is radiant. As an adept begins to grasp the light of the sun, they too become radiant. It is not the adept who radiates, however. It is the living one which moves through the adept that radiates. The adept has become transparent to the light hidden behind all things, the great spiritual sun of which all reflects and all receives. Light is awareness, and what is awareness but the increasing ability to be wise? The mind, becoming aware of falsity, gains wisdom, and together, hand in hand, they act in the world. This is the essence of the sun, the merging of the clear awareness of the mind with the deep wellspring of wisdom from the spirit. For spirit is shuttling to the mind the infinite wisdom that comes from that place where all things return and all things emerge, source. To truly act in the world is to walk with knowledge. It is to have access to this inner knowing, to have gnosis. Without it, the adept will continue to, as Ra says, grasp at the shadows. The transformation of the spirit is also known as the resurrection in Tarot. In the mind cycle, the transformation archetype refers to the chosen path. It represents how one chooses to progress in their journey into the deep mind, either in reverence of nature or in perverting her. The transformation of the body represents the death of the will of the lower self in the adept. In the transformation of the spirit, we see the result of this death, namely, as the spirit resurrected. It is the individual will emerging from the confines of hereditary influences into the influence of the divine. Our hereditary influences make up a small part of who we are as individuals. It is easy to mistake the physical for all there is, for it is a strong illusion. The fundamental will, which underlies all matter and energy, is the true essence of who you are. This will takes action, and when acting in accordance with higher principles, is in harmony. When it is acting in accordance with lower principles, it is in disharmony. The transformation can be represented by the image of the cross. A cross is a very ancient symbol seen in all spiritual traditions in the history of mankind. According to Manly P. Hall, in the Christian tradition, the cross first is a symbol of the death of his Redeemer, through whose martyrdom he feels that he partakes of the glory of God. Secondly, it is a symbol of humility, patience, and the burden of life. It is interesting that the cross should be both a symbol of life and a symbol of death. And Ra speaks about the crux sensata, or Ankh. The crux sensata is intended to be seen as an image of the internal, in and through manifestation, and beyond manifestation, through the sacrifice and transformation of that which is manifest. The process of resurrection can be summed up like this. A will incarnates into a body. This will has two influences which are grafted onto it. One from the body itself, the hereditary influences, the societal influences, the physical world's influences. And the other type of influence is the influence of the spirit, which are the influences corresponding to the divine. The process of transformation involves the individual will allowing either the higher, the spirit, to guide it, or the lower, separated self, to guide it, either subverting nature or being guided by nature. To be reborn is to have first died or gone asleep. The spirit, taking on a false persona, the ego, the matrix of the spirit, Typhon, becomes engulfed in the trappings of that which has perverted nature. The spirit has sacrificed itself and died. It eventually is resurrected after an intense period of awakening. and when reborn, the individual has transcended life and death. As the anonymous author in the book Meditation on the Tarot states, it is the neutralization of both life and death. The one who is resurrected can act as if he were living, and at the same time, he is free from terrestrial links as if he were dead. The individual who is resurrected is not the same person who was once dead. They have become the living embodiment of the three, the Holy Trinity, that which, as Jacob Boehme says, makes the invisible known to the visible, tangible universe. The Father, the Son, Source, the Logos, Mother, or the Holy Spirit, Sophia, wisdom, or nature, and the third aspect, the child, depicted in the card is the result of a love between the Father and Mother, between the fiery light of the sun and the receptive mystery of nature. It is the Son, the Christ, the mediator between the divine and the material. The Egyptians saw the sun as a symbol of immortality, for the sun died each night, only to return again the next day. The spirit, like the sun, moves into darkness upon incarnation, only to eventually rise again. The sun is the central logos, and its light illuminates the realm of matter. The invisible becomes known to the visible. Manly B. Hall writes that the realm of the spirit is the realm of causation, and the material world is the realm of effects, while the intellectual or soul world is the sphere of mediation. In the Christian tradition, Christ is the personified higher intellect and soul nature, called the Mediator. Mankind is the mediator between the physical and the spiritual realms. The regenerated are illuminated by the light of the Logos, by the sun within. Thus the material world of matter is transformed by the Logos as its light moves through you and out into the physical world. Finally, we come to the great way of the Spirit. The great way of the Spirit is the adept living in the Logos. Awareness has entered intelligent infinity and dwells there, existing in perfect harmony. In Hebrew, Logos is the word dabar, which means intelligence, word, creative information. The Logos can be seen as the creative word, which is intelligent and informs. Jean Leaves Loop in his book The Sacred Embrace of Jesus and Mary says, in order for something to exist, it must be informed in the genetic sense of the word. Without this information, as the Gospel of John says, nothing can subsist or take form. Thus in the very beginning, there is this intelligence, this creative word, which informs all things. Heraclitus described the Logos as a link, and that we become intelligent through aspiring to the Logos. But what is the Logos linking to? The Logos is the link to infinity. Intelligent infinity is the creative word, the Logos. Intelligent infinity informs, as well as harvest. Ra speaks about being in potential, and that the further along the path of the adept you are, the more potential you exhibit. The potential refers to the informing received by the Logos, or intelligent infinity. The closer you are to the Logos, the more you are in potential, because the closer you are to infinity. The great way of the Spirit is also called the adept in Tarot, because this is the full blossoming of the adept, penetrating intelligent infinity and able to consciously access infinite potential. It is piercing the veil and becoming the Logos directly. In the card is depicted a woman playing a harp, and above her are 4 emblems. According to C.C. Zan in the book The Sacred Tarot, the 4 emblems represent the processes of evolution. The head of the lion symbolizes the courage and action which is necessary for real attainment. The bull represents the fructifying agent of nature and points to the necessity of work in all progress. The eagle represents sex that has been turned into channels which lead to spirituality, and the head of man indicates that both intuition and intelligence are necessary guides in unfolding the highest spiritual possibilities. The bird in the center relates to the cross, the symbol of the unity of the higher and the lower, of man's true purpose, that of the mediator between heaven and earth. It also relates to the Kabbalistic and alchemical language of the birds, a secret and perfect language and the key to perfect knowledge. Those who understand the language of the birds can see the hidden symbolism in everything. The great way of the spirit represents the individual capable of dissecting the hidden behind the word. It represents the individual who now lives in the Logos, whose mind, body, and spirit are in perfect harmony, and who uses their instrument in service by radiating outward the perfect sound of the infinite.